I recently decided to rewatch a lot of the DC animated movies and kind of fell into a Superman groove to the point where I ended up with a comprehensive list by comparing each viewing experience. I want to point out that this will not include any live-action Superman movies, nor will it include any Justice League or Batman movies where Superman appears in, just animated movies and just Superman solo movies, plus the 2 Batman-Superman movies because he is in the title and he is one of the 2 main characters. And obviously this is just my opinion and not at all a definitive list, so if you disagree with something I said, that's not only perfectly fine, you're also encouraged to leave your own list in the comments down below. But with that out of the way, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and let's begin. Superman Brainiac Attacks is a really weird movie as it takes all of the same characters and all of the same character designs and style of Superman the Animated Series, complete with Tim Daly as Superman and Donna Delaney as Lois Lane, but is unequivocally not a part of that universe. There are some clear canonical discrepancies, but it's most clear in certain characters' characterization, such as Lex Luthor, who feels like a parody of Lex Luthor as a character, much more based off of Gene Hackman's comedic and greedy Lex, who's really just out for money, instead of the conniving, motivated by his hate for Superman Lex within the DCAU and Superman the Animated Series, also with a completely different voice actor. This entire movie feels like a DCAU Superman movie without any of the heart or soul of the DCAU. The characters are far more one-dimensional, the plot is pretty goofy and forgettable, and the writing is a lot more childish than Superman the Animated Series or Justice League Unlimited ever were. That being said, there is one thing about this movie that I did enjoy, and that's that it explored the relationship between Clark and Lois, and watching those scenes, I kind of wish like a better version of this movie was canon to the DCAU, because that universe didn't really do much with Clark and Lois, but aside from that, it is a very low-tier Superman movie. Superman Unbound is ultimately pretty forgettable. I mean, I watched it just like a week ago and I already don't really remember a lot of what happened. I don't love the art style or this version of these characters. Clark is far less likable here than he should be, which is most exemplified in his relationship with Kara. Here it kind of feels like he hates Kara, and I made the mistake of watching this right after watching Superman Batman Apocalypse, another movie which focuses on that relationship, and Superman and Supergirl are a lot more loving towards each other in that movie, and Superman feels like he's excited about the prospect of another Kryptonian landing on Earth. In this movie, he kind of just feels like he doesn't really like Kara, kind of feels like Kara is a bother to him, and that does kind of get on my nerves. The fight scenes and the animation is not bad in this movie, but there's just nothing special or memorable, which ultimately, like I said, ends up being a forgettable movie in Superman Unbound. Reign of the Supermen is a superbly disappointing sequel to the fantastic adaptation of The Death of Superman. This movie just lacks all of the emotion, all of the care, and all of the impact of its predecessor, instead of focusing on the tragedy that is the death of Superman, and also then when he returns. Instead of focusing on his reunion with Lois, we don't really get much of that. This movie puts all of its screen time in the action and other super people, none of whom are even half as compelling as Clark or Lois, or especially their relationship. It isn't entirely the movie's fault, as it is adapting a story that lacks Superman until the final act and does focus on those new characters, but the fact is, it's not a very good story in the comics, and unlike The Death of Superman, this movie doesn't really do anything to reinvent the story, aside from making it slightly more connected to the larger saga of the universe by replacing Mongol with Darkseid, but otherwise, it does nothing to improve on an otherwise lackluster story. The All-Star Superman comic is considered by many to be one of the best Superman stories ever written, and I gotta be honest, I haven't read that comic, but if this movie is any indication, I don't really get why. There are definitely things to enjoy here, like the animation is pretty good, the story of Superman slowly dying this time around is definitely unique and brings up some interesting opportunities, and the final showdown between Superman and Lex is pretty good. But for me personally, I think the most important thing in a Superman movie is the characterization of Superman and Clark Kent, as well as his relationships, not the action or the fight scenes. And I don't really like the characterization here. This version of Superman feels much more alien than he should, and much more like a god instead of like a person. He feels like an alien who came to Earth as an adult and somehow learned to act like a human, instead of somebody who grew up on Earth in America and just so happens to have powers and then later learns that he's an alien. This version of Superman spends most of his time around robots and Kryptonian technology in the Fortress of Solitude, and mostly talks in a very monotone voice. His Clark Kent also feels like a fake persona where his whole personality is just a bumbling idiot, and they take that way too far. I just personally really don't like this characterization for Superman, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't take the rest of the movie, and the rest of the movie isn't even all that amazing either. The two Superman-Batman movies are practically equal in terms of quality, but I put Apocalypse higher due to it being more Superman-focused. So it's a better Superman movie, but Public Enemies is definitely a better Batman movie, so if I ever do a Batman animated movie ranking, Public Enemies would be higher than Apocalypse. In fact, it would be a lot higher, because Apocalypse, Batman kind of feels like a side character. But this movie is a lot of fun. The dynamic between Clark and Bruce is a lot of fun. It feels like they've been friends for years. It's the type of thing that I'd love to see in live action, but we just haven't gotten so far. The story, however, is not very good. Like, it's basically just Superman and Batman going around being attacked by heroes and villains, before then having to stop an incoming meteor. The world's finest dynamic mostly makes up for the lackluster story, so it is a solid 7 out of 10. But overall, it's pretty middle of the road. Like I said, Superman Batman Apocalypse is a better Superman movie. If this were a Batman movie's ranking, then Public Enemies would be a lot higher than Apocalypse, because Batman does feel like a supporting character and definitely not the partial lead. He's not even in the final battle. That being said, while he's in it less, the dynamic between Clark and Bruce is still a lot of fun, and they add in Supergirl and Wonder Woman and Big Barda as well as effective foils to that dynamic. Speaking of Supergirl, like I said a bit earlier in the video, I like the dynamic here between Superman and Supergirl a lot more than in Unbound. It feels like I said, Clark is excited about the prospect of another survivor from Krypton, and basically takes her in immediately as his sister. All that being said, everything to do with the namesake of this movie, other than Superman and Batman, which is Apocalypse, I thought was fairly lackluster. Apocalypse itself feels completely empty, and Darkseid seems way less intelligent and way less powerful than he usually is. But all in all, it's a fun movie that isn't perfect in the slightest. Superman Man of Tomorrow is the namesake of the new DC animated movie universe, the Tomorrowverse, and as such does a pretty good job at beginning that universe. The new art style is definitely unique. Clark's characterization is very human and vulnerable, which is helped by the fact this movie showcases his debut as Superman, and he doesn't even know he's Kryptonian until Martian Manhunter reveals it to him in his dormant memories, which also brings up Martian Manhunter's side of this movie, who has a fun dynamic with Superman, and his fake-out death really shocked me on my first viewing, but it also serves a purpose in this movie about the world's reaction to aliens, which was an interesting approach to Superman's debut to the world. Some people might say it was poorly handled, but I disagree. I really liked that side of the movie. I think the movie showed Clark's fears about the world finding out he's an alien well, and when he finally reveals it, there's this interesting contrast of people assuming Parasite is the alien, but in reality Parasite is a human, and the very human-looking Superman is the actual alien. That's not to say this movie is perfect. I think that just in general, the Tomorrowverse era of movies really suffer for some basic, unprofessional, and honestly embarrassing movie-making issues of bad sound design. The dialogue has these horrible pauses between lines, completely devoid of sound and completely lacking in background music. It's definitely not as egregious here as in, say, Justice Society World War II or Green Lantern Beware My Power, but unlike Batman The Long Halloween, which doesn't really have it that much, this movie definitely does at times, and it's very distracting and feels very unprofessional. Superman Red Son is based on the critically acclaimed Elseworld story of the same name about if Superman landed in the Soviet Union in the 1950s. He still grew up on a farm raised by a loving couple, but grew up under communism and became an agent of the Soviet Union as an adult. It's an interesting take on the evil Superman trope. He's not fully evil, he's clearly conflicted by the evils of his country, and even goes so far to kill Stalin because of it, all while throughout the movie becoming more and more like Stalin. I thought this movie pulled it off really well. I thought the conflict was well handled in the movie. It's relatively well paced and well animated. I like the nuance of this alternate evil-ish version of Superman. The death of Superman is probably the single most famous Superman story ever told behind his origin, and certainly is the most adapted. The movie is half Death of Superman and half a very different version of Reign of the Supermen, and we're looking at the entire Death and Return of Superman saga. While this isn't a clear-cut adaptation, I think it is the best version of that entire story, but it isn't the best version of Death of Superman story itself, as that would be handled a bit better later on in animated form. We get to Doomsday pretty quickly in this movie, so we don't get all that much time setting up Clark as a person to set up the emotion of his death. What we do get is enough to make it so that his death doesn't fall completely flat. But I could think of a couple animated Superman deaths that are far more emotional, so it isn't in the top tier in terms of that. But in general, Clark Kent isn't really focused on much in this movie. It ends up being fine though, because like Lois's story, which is a story I really like, of basically just figuring out that Clark is Superman right away, blurs the line between the two identities. So when Superman is with Lois, he feels a lot more human and a lot more like Clark than he would otherwise. The fight itself between Superman and Doomsday is very brutal, and in general, Doomsday is a very scary creature in this movie. The second half of the movie heavily deviates from the source material by bringing in a single new Superman before Clark returns instead of 4, and if I'm being honest, it's all the better for it. Reign of the Supermen isn't a very good story, and its DC animated movie universe adaptation proves this. This movie streamlines that story into a much less convoluted and far less bloated version that leaves room for the impact of Clark and Superman's return. I do think, however, that having both stories crammed into a single 80-minute movie is a bit overambitious, and the movie would have been better if it were a live-action theatrical release with the exact same story with a lot more time dedicated to the gap between Superman being dead and being alive and any other emotional impact that they would have added to the story. All that being said though, I will add that this movie maybe has the single best Superman theme ever. Like, it's my absolute favorite, including live-action movies, to the point they actually reuse it in completely unrelated Superman animated movies, including the next one on this list. Despite being the original and one of the greatest superheroes of all time, Superman has lost a lot of respect from the general public, as they yearn for darker characters and anti-heroes who are deemed more effective because they kill their enemies, and want Superman to be angrier, darker, and more jaded. This movie is a perfect allegory for that argument. In fact, that's exactly what this movie is about. Superman's role in the world is challenged by Manchester Black and the elite, who make sure their enemies stay down when they beat them. The public, who are sick of villains being put in prison just to break out, love the idea of the elite for killing the people who need to be killed. This actually causes some conflict within Superman. He doubts himself and causes the elite to take a step further in killing the leaders of two warring countries. And obviously at that point they go a bit too far, so they need to be stopped. But up until that point, there was some real conflict within Superman. There's some real doubts within him and his place in the modern world, as the public turned against him and in favor of the elite. But in the end, there's this big final showdown, which is like one of the coolest displays of Superman's power ever put to film, but also such a creative way to defeat the villain by giving him exactly what he wanted, but in the process proving him wrong. He gave him this darker, angrier, murderous Superman, something that it seems like the real world public wants as well, and shows him the damage it would do to innocent people. And I gotta be honest, I didn't really love this movie the first time I watched it, like years ago, but I didn't really appreciate the character of Superman until now. And now that I do, I absolutely hate the argument that Superman is a boring character, or that he's not as cool as the most popular superheroes like Iron Man, Captain America, and Batman. Those characters are more interesting. I don't necessarily think they are, and this movie perfectly exemplifies what makes Superman so interesting, and does it so well. Plus, they bring back the theme from Superman Doomsday, which, as I said earlier, is my favorite Superman theme of all time. And that brings us to what I consider to be the best animated Superman movie of all time, and a top 5 DC animated movie, The Death of Superman. This movie mostly focuses on the relationship between Clark and Lois, arguably the most iconic couple in comic history, and I love this version of it. I love it when they make it so that Lois falls in love with Clark, not Superman, like they did with Superman, Lois, and in this movie, as it makes the relationship feel so much more real. It does wonders for both Lois and Clark as characters. It makes Lois feel so much less vain, and it makes Clark feel like the real person and the real personality instead of a fake personality he puts on, which, like I said with the All-Star Superman movie, I absolutely hate that characterization of Superman. A lot of time is dedicated to this relationship, developing both Clark and Lois as characters and as a couple, so that the eventual death of Superman would hit as hard as possible. Before that, though, the movie spends a lot of time building up Doomsday as a threat as the entire Justice League struggles against him, and just like Superman Doomsday, he is a force to be reckoned with, and he is very, very scary and very brutal in this movie as he inches closer to Metropolis, all while Clark is struggling to confess his identity to Lois, a storyline that I really liked. Again, Superman and Lois both really feel like three-dimensional characters in this movie, so much more so than he ever did in previous movies where he appeared in this universe. He was mostly just Superman, and then he dated Diana for a bit. All those things paled in comparison in terms of characterization and development to what he gets in this movie. When Superman finally arrives to the fight, it goes crazy. It's so brutal and so well animated, and my personal favorite moment is when it's interrupted by when Superman is fighting Doomsday on the bridge and he traps him just long enough to save a kid, telling him everything is going to be okay, and then the kid gives him a hug. It's such a heartbreaking moment knowing what's coming, knowing that Superman's death is on the horizon, and it just, again, exemplifies and encapsulates what Superman is and what makes him so interesting and such a heroic figure, and it's possibly my favorite moment in the entire movie. And when the death finally comes, because of that and because of all the build-up with Lois and also a bit of relationship with the Justice League, his death hits really, really hard, equaling and rivaling the death of Superman in the Hereafter episode of Justice League. This movie takes a story that was created solely for shock value and sales, which, to be fair, it definitely accomplished, and turned it into one of the most well-animated, emotional, and impactful animated superhero movies ever made. It's just a crying shame that its follow-up ended up being so damn disappointing. But that's it for this video, my ranking of all 11 DC animated Superman movies. And let me know your list in the comments down below. What do you think? What do you think is the best Superman movie ever made? What do you think is the worst movie ever made? And maybe I'll make a follow-up video ranking every Batman animated movie, but that will be a lot longer because there's like quadruple the amount of Batman movies compared to Superman.